As someone who has played every single entry in the Fire Emblem series, except for Thrakia for some reason, I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on what makes a Fire Emblem game good. At the very least, I can give you a more comprehensive review than all the game journalists who played the first 6 chapters before declaring the story an atrocious mess and the gameplay the second coming of Jesus. Also, I just want to note, all the footage you're seeing here is going to be from the first couple chapters. I didn't want to show you anything that would potentially spoil the game, so don't worry, completely spoiler-free review. I'll start with the story. It's bad, and we all kind of agree on that, but is it good enough? For me, a Fire Emblem story needs to be good enough to create a memorable chapter. For example, Elincia's Gambit in Radiant Dawn. This is an amazing chapter where the story puts Elincia's back against the wall and then asks you to find a way out for her in a grueling defense chapter. Every time I think, do I want to play Radiant Dawn again? This is one of the chapters that pops into my head. And most Fire Emblem games do this. Conquest Chapter 10, the Battle of Gronder Field, the final chapter of Echoes, the list goes on. Each of these chapters are fun because the story gets you invested in the gameplay, and the gameplay is then strong enough to deliver on that setup. I'm happy to say that this game does deliver those kind of chapters. Chapter 11, which I won't show to avoid spoilers, will absolutely be remembered as the peak Fire Emblem chapter of this game. The story sets up a punch that the gameplay delivers on, and I think as long as Fire Emblem keeps putting out chapters that do that, the story will never be unplayably bad. Another example is Chapter 17, just to shout it out. That being said, the story has its problems that I definitely have to mention. The biggest issue is that it's just really boring most of the time. I don't mind that the story is a little more silly than previous games, but when you have a silly story, the sky's kind of the limit on what you can do. Take Tokyo Mirage Sessions as an example. That game used its corny-ass storyline as an excuse to get away with whatever it wanted. Engage, on the other hand, used the story's silliness to write a very boring and generic Fire Emblem story. And when we're 18 games into the franchise, that doesn't cut it anymore. I think the game did a decent job at making the villains feel threatening, mostly because the game will say, the corrupted are really strong, and when you fight them, they kind of kick your ass a bit. However, late game you start to see the same bosses over and over and over, who retreat when they die. This caused the enemy faction to start to feel a lot less competent and threatening as the game goes on. The main character being a divine dragon is also honestly a problem. You're just handed most of the emblem rings for showing up, without even feeling like you had to do anything to earn them. In a video game, one of the most important parts of a story is making the player feel like they are accomplishing something. Instead, a lot of the game feels like you're just walking from one place to the other in order to be handed the next ring for free. Character-wise, they're hit or miss. They all do the, wow, I'm so quirky because of this one weird trait I have, and they will bring up those traits in most of their supports and combat dialogue. What's worse is that groups of retainers have similar quirks, which makes those things grate on you even faster. Chloe and Luis, for example, both like to be creepy voyeurs in different ways, while Boucheron, Eddie, and Alfred are all on Team Muscles. So it feels like you hear the same concepts regurgitated in a lot of the supports and combat dialogue. Also, every character is usually trash in their Allier support. They either have a very boring support where nothing really happens, or they're singing lullabies outside Allier's room because they don't know what boundaries are. I genuinely liked most characters way more in the 8-second introduction during the plot than I did during supports. The more I get to know them, the more annoying most characters become, which feels like the opposite of what you want. The supports also have a problem with fluff. Several of them are just fluffy day-in-the-life moments with these characters, which means the A support feels less conclusionary than it's supposed to. Again, no specific examples due to spoilers, but I especially felt supports between characters who already knew each other, such as lords and their retainers, never established any kind of plot for the support to follow, which contributes to them being boring. But enough about the story, let's talk about gameplay. I think the game is genuinely really fun. I've been playing it so much that I haven't been able to record this video. The break mechanic and the emblem rings all serve to give players more agency over how a fight is going than previous games. The break mechanic especially makes it hard for the player to just sit in one spot and kill everything on the enemy phase. The early game levels are really well designed too. They are challenging and constantly throw a mix of enemies at you, which makes it very hard to win. There are also very few levels that feel like a slog. Even Fog of War and Desert levels feel fun in this game, something I never thought I'd say in a Fire Emblem game. That being said, from around Chapter 14 onward, the game starts to throw large numbers of the same type of enemy at you in groups, with lots of space between one group and the next. This decreasing quality of map design causes the enemy to use the break mechanic a lot less. When you're fighting a homogeneous group of spear enemies, you can just enemy phase a lot of them with a single axe unit. And with the long walks between groups of enemies, these levels started to have a lot more downtime. So the gameplay becomes a lot less dynamic and cool as you reach some of these later levels in the game. I also had a lot of issues with the interface. Hiding supports and bonds behind the references button, having special skills like engaging be placed above the standard attack, and a lot of the other interface decisions are baffling. At the center of this is the new combat forecast. It sucks. When you have a few chain attacks, emblem skills, and other modifiers involved in a fight, there's just a lot of numbers on your screen with no real explanation for how they got there. Eventually you can figure it out, but I thought this presentation of information had too much of a learning curve to get into it. I get that the old forecast format wouldn't work with how many new combat modifiers there are, but this one isn't doing the job yet either. Lastly, I want to talk about the economy and grinding. Skirmish levels feel very unrewarding and for some reason appear to auto-scale to a higher level than where you're at for most of the story. They're also really long, having about as many enemies as an actual level and take just as long to complete. Since the primary way of obtaining forged materials is picking them up off the ground after a level or in Somniel, you'll have to do these skirmishes a lot just to forge a few weapons. The only other way to get these resources is from the flea market, where it costs 500 gold for a single piece of steel and 5,000 gold according to Serene's Forest for a single silver ingot. I never even had the silver ingot show up in the flea market during my playthrough of the game, so I can't confirm that one, but I can confirm the steel did cost 500 gold. The skirmishes are pretty stingy on gold rewards too, and outside of the gold drops from the story, I feel like I never get any significant funds from grinding skirmishes, only like maybe 1,000 gold from a gold skirmish. And then the game provides a huge gold sink in country investments, which you kind of need to do if you want to be able to even get silver after completing a mission. It feels like you'd have to grind a lot to figure out what the end game of the forge system looks like, or buy the DLC and get that sweet 30% off on all gold purchases with the silver card, which is kind of an icky practice. I think these skirmishes just needed to be much more rewarding. The gameplay being very player-face focused means you spend a lot more time on each level than you did in previous entries. So when a single skirmish can take me 15 to 30 minutes, it doesn't make sense for them to give such small rewards. SP costs for emblem skills also feel really high sometimes, considering how long it takes to get SP. Definitely a really grindy economy overall if you want to try out all the cool builds available. Finally, I wanted to give a special shout out to Tempest Trials. These trials make you play 3 or more maps in a row for a couple small orbs as a reward. These orbs are the only way you can upgrade Engage weapons, and beating a Tempest trial doesn't give you very many considering how long it takes to finish that many maps. It takes like an hour to finish one Tempest trial, and I got maybe one of each orb. By the end of the game, I was mostly using my inventory weapons as the Engage weapons had completely fallen off. And the fact that there is no way to get these materials during the story sucks. I usually do no grind runs when I want to play a Fire Emblem game, so upgrading Engage weapons is entirely impossible for most of my playthroughs, and that doesn't feel very fun to me. Anyway, that's my last gripe about the game's economy, I promise. Let's talk about Somniel. It's definitely less required than the monastery, but it still creates some issues for me. I'm lumping the explore the battlefield and pick up materials thing in with Somniel here, but the fact that I have to engage with these more fluffy parts of the game to get necessary forging materials is really annoying. The fact that the arena gives you free experience at the end of each level is also annoying, especially since it is locked behind an extra loading screen for no reason. Doing both of these things feels really necessary, and though it's a huge step up from the monastery, I did feel like I was forced to engage with Somniel more than I wanted to. There's also the Emblem Vault, where you go to inherit skills, that's locked behind an extra loading screen like the arena. This arena should be accessible from a menu, like the shops are. There are almost no reason to make the player go to Somniel and hit a loading screen just for this. And that's the real problem with Somniel. You have to load in to get there and then load in several of the features, and it often makes me just wish everything was in a series of menus instead. Somniel and exploring battlefields is a part of why levels often feel so long in this game, outside of levels just being kind of long. That being said, I still think the gameplay is top tier. The game is so much more strategic than any past Fire Emblem game. From the engage function to weapon breaks to follow-up attacks to guards, we finally have the tools to get past units being just bundles of stats. And the enemy can make good use of most of these features too, and are genuinely challenging to beat most of the time. I'd say the game overall is a solid 8 out of 10 for me. I want to see the next Fire Emblem game bring most of these features back, but add a little more polish in the quality of life department and a much stronger story. If you're on the fence about it, I'd say it's worth picking up for a good time. Like I said, I've been playing it non-stop since I bought it. If this is going to be your first Fire Emblem though, I'd say Three Houses and Awakening are better entry points to the series, as this has a lot of features that I think could be overwhelming to a new player. And that ends my review. If you like what I had to say, or want to hate watch more of my opinions later, subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be making a lot more Engage content going forward, but right now I'm going back to playing it. Bye!